How did you learn to read? Do you remember? Welcome to Learn with the Curators of Wangka Wakaṉutja, the story of the Papunya Literature Production Centre. My name is Carly. I'm the Assistant Director of Lifelong Learning. We acknowledge the Opalgate Foundation for their tremendous support of the library's Lifelong Learning initiative. I'm really excited to learn more about this incredible collection and how our exhibition was developed. With me is Rebecca Bateman, Director of Indigenous Engagement. How are you going, Beck?
Good. Yama, everyone. It's great to be here today, and I'm also really excited to be able to have this chat and talk about how this amazing and really important piece of work came together to have the exhibition that we see now. And I would like to start, of course, by acknowledging that we're talking to you from Ngunnawal country in Canberra. Pay my respects to the Ngunnawal people, their elders past and present, through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. As I always do, I also like to extend that acknowledgement to all of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples whose stories and histories, knowledges and cultures are documented in the collections here at the National Library, and to pay my respects to them and their elders also.
Thank you, Beck. Now, in today's webinar, we have people from all over Australia. It's wonderful to have you all here. I know that we have a lot of people from the gallery, library, archives and museum sector, but we also have people today who bring their own expertise and curiosities. I'd like you to start by thinking about a line of inquiry around perhaps the Papunya Readers themselves or the exhibition. What are you hoping to learn, or what are you hoping to discover a little more about in this session? We were lucky enough to sit down with members of the curatorium who came to Canberra to launch the exhibition. So you will hear from 6 of the 7 members of the curatorium. You'll hear from Karen and Priscilla, Kulata and Rosalind. You'll also hear from Samantha Disbray and Vivian Johnson. Unfortunately, Charlotte Philippus was unable to join us. We hope that you will enjoy hearing their stories, but also that you'll learn from the reflections and the history of the collection that they bring to us.
In this book, we published our Wangka Wakaṉutja, and this is from the 80s that the Literature Production Centre at Papunya was there, and all the resources, like books, all that was there with us for the kids to share. But now we're going to leave it behind so the world can see it, how we was before when we was doing the languages in Papunya school. The people was there for us, the old people was there to share that knowledge of the cultural for the future. But in my opinion, it's still like moving on. I can hear it, I can feel it, the ancestors, like we was there with them, dancing, robberies, group, boys and girls, elders. It's all in here, the cultural backgrounds and the resources for the kids to learn, like writing, reading, like me. I was reading when I was at the school, and now I read and write in language. sometimes I translate books from the English to Luritja. The memories of our old people still
Yeah, we
echoing,
still remember them.
whispering.
Without them, we forget.
We can't go out without nothing. The old peoples in the past, we can share it to the future. We gotta leave it here as it is, so the world can come and see. And they are welcome to come.
We will play a few clips from various members of the curatorium and also our senior curator, Alistair. But Beck, let's start with you and your involvement in this really, really huge project.
Yeah, so this is a project that has happened in stages over quite a number of years here. In fact, you can trace the involvement of the National Library with the Papunya Literature Centre and these readers as far back as the 1970s, when the very earliest of the readers were, being produced, and they were coming to the library, some of them through the legal deposit scheme. So we had a small but obviously very important collection of these readers here in the collection. In 2017, fast forward just a little bit, the Papunya community, along with Vivian Johnson and Samantha Dispray, who you'll hear from later, they applied for a community heritage grant through the National Library, and that enabled them to, you'll hear the amazing story later about the sort of unlocking and rediscovery of these works. But that grant really enabled them to be able to start looking at how they were going to care for and store, document these records. And it was at that point, obviously, that the library became involved in a very direct way. At that point, members of library staff went out to Papunya to provide advice alongside the Community Heritage Grant, and at that point brought back copies of the material that we didn't already have. And that at that point, the collection of Papunya Readers that we hold at the National Library became the most comprehensive collection outside of Papunya itself, which was pretty extraordinary. And then a year or so after that, Professor Vivian Johnson came to the library to do a fellowship. She knew that we had all of these works here at the library, but she also knew that there was some work to be done in the way they were described in the catalogue, in properly attributing the individual authors and illustrators of the works. And she had the knowledge and the decades-long involvement with the community to be able to provide us with the information to enrich those records in a way that would make them discoverable and meaningful. I really got to know Vivian at that point, and she really brought me into the world of Papunya then, and I kind of started to get, excited about all this at this point. And I remember even back in those early days in about 2018-19 when Vivian was here and we would discuss these things, and she was very clear even that early on that the community, what they wanted more than anything was an exhibition. They wanted to showcase these works. They were so proud of what they'd achieved, and rightfully so, of what they had achieved in their community, and they wanted the whole world to know about them. And I remember thinking at the time, gee, I'd love to be able to make something like that happen, but I just don't know, what that might look like and how we might get there. But bit by bit, step by step, we kept having opportunities come our way to build on the conversations that I was having with Vivian. First of all was a very generous philanthropic donation from an anonymous donor who really wanted to support the digitisation of some First Nations language material from the library's collection. And I, of course, had the perfect project to suggest for that one. And we were able to digitise the books. And then from there, even before we got to the exhibition, conversation. We started to have conversations with our publishing colleagues about, Vivian was talking about wanting to write a book, and wanting to write a book not just herself but with Samantha and with Charlotte Philippus, who was very, very key in this whole body of work. And so we started that conversation. In the meantime, Papunya in the community, they created their own little exhibition in community. That went to Alice Springs and it went to Darwin. And myself and a colleague went to Darwin to have a look at it, and we said, you know what, we think we can bring this to the National Library. We'd love to have this. And it went from there.
Thanks, Beck. We'll head back into the gallery now. We'll hear first from Alistair and then Priscilla and Kulada Nelson.
Welcome to Wangka Wakaṉutja, the story of the Papunya Literature Production Centre at the National Library of Australia. My name's Alistair, I'm a curator here in the exhibitions team. I want to talk to you today about some of the themes that we have in Wangka Wakaṉutja and why it's not immediately obvious what those themes might be. In the first and second room here, we have an introduction to Papunya for those who might not be familiar with the community in the Northern Territory. In the third room, we have old-time stories, stories that have been passed down through generations, that are told around campfires, that have been illustrated by younger generations of Pintupi and Luritja peoples to pass down to their children and their grandchildren. In the fourth room, we have stories of contact. The community refers to them as when we met whitefella stories. These tell stories of early interactions between European settlers and Pintupi-Luritja people in the 1930s and earlier. The last room tells stories of the community as it is today and was when the books were produced in the 1970s and 80s. As you make your way through the exhibition, you'll find that there's not a lot of introductory text to what each theme is and where it begins. We really wanted to allow the stories to speak for themselves and to allow the community to speak to them as well. As you walk through the exhibition, you'll find quotes placed around each room which tell you a little bit about what might be in the room. Each story comes with a biographical wall panel which tells you a little bit about who wrote the story down or who illustrated the story, as well as a summary of what happens in the story, translated into English at the end. The stories are told and written in Pintupi-Luritja. They're a way for people in the Papunya community to continue their traditions of telling stories, to pass those stories down to the next generation of Papunya community members, and to teach their children how to read and write in their first language. Each page, each illustration is presented with the text that is written with it in the book in Pintupi-Luritja. These texts are important for community members as they're half of the story, but we understand that not all visitors will be able to read Pintupi-Luritja. The translated summaries at the end are a way for our visitors who don't speak Pintupi-Luritja to engage with the story that's being told through the book. The books are the star of the show, but the exhibition also includes artworks, maps, photographs, posters, newsletters, and a wealth of other objects that were created by the Papunya community in the 1970s and 1980s.
Hello, my name is Dennis Nelson Shakamara. We work together in a Papunya school of white collar and black collar people. We working together and helping to how to speak English, and we teaching white people our language, Wangka Wakaṉutja, Wangka Wakaṉutja, and Pintupi-Luritja. We learn them to speak 50-50, like white collar and black collar. The same language to share, and working for education in the school. I am showing my drawings, a picture in this book. When I work in electricity work in a school in Papunya, and to 1999. From 10 years I work. All these drawings, this on the whole people's stories.
They tell story for him.
For reading our language.
Yeah, that's what he do.
True language, for literature and English. That's a problem when I was working in a school at Papunya in the earlier days.
Hello, Priscilla Brown. I just want to talk about Dennis Nelson's story. That he has been an illustrator a long time ago. That me and him, we used to work there. Even my husband, the people who have passed away were there working together. That we made a book, and he was illustrating the books that my daughter made. And even my husband is used to be an illustrator. You know, with him, with Dennis, together they always, illustrate the book. When they see the picture, what's this picture means? Oh, he wrote it down in language. In our language, we need to, and we Charlotte does that too. Charlotte Pelvis and Kulada. But he's the main one who drew all the picture for everyone else and for the old people. He's the one. My husband and him, too, illustrator.
Thank you.
These two pieces are recent artworks by Dennis Nelson Jacamara, one of the Papunya Literature Production Centre's most prolific artists.
My father, to study making. Yeah. I make a picture about Johnny. Bird, put a nest. Making nest for little one. A table. This one, I made a little table. Walking in the sand.
They're watching and painting.
Man telling his language. That's not devil, that's plane. You fly around in the sky. Yeah. You can go for a ride. No, on ride, I must jump in. You don't know land, you don't push people. That's on the mission time. Russian time, no money. They don't know money, no. That's the working for trucker in the early days. They don't know anything, car or plane. They come from bush. They're naked people. That table, this one, it's changing. Bobby should have tried playing the dog just get angry. Hi, that's the white fella. Yeah, I don't know. They're African people or autistic people. Early days, yeah. When I'm like old people telling a story, well, this one, old story from my father's, Johnny, when he was a little boy, like just a little boy, his mother and father there. I was nothing. I was spirit.
It's a story that's told in numerous of Kulita's books, but he wanted to go back and correct the stories that he wrote in the 70s and 80s. He felt that his representation of the biplane wasn't as accurate as he wanted it to be. We've got the original book on display. Come and have a look with me. This story is called Naiulu Kalinu Mamu. It translates to I Thought It Was a Devil. It's a story told by Johnny Warankula to his son Dennis Nelson. Johnny was at a place called Ilpili in the 1930s when the planes first made contact with the Pintupi people. He describes being scared of the plane and thinking that it's a devil, accompanied by an ominous big wind, a bad omen. It wasn't until later on when Dennis saw a photograph of that early plane that had made contact in the 1930s that he realized that he'd drawn the wrong plane.
Well, I just love hearing people speak about their own artwork. But Beck, we've started to have lots of great questions come through, and I wondered if you could give us a little bit more about the ICIP work that we did for this exhibition.
Yeah, so this exhibition was developed when we were about 2 years into the implementation of the National Library's ICIP protocol, and so it was very timely, both to be able to have a framework as clear and as appropriate as the ICIP protocol to be able to guide the way that we approach this work, but also it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to walk the talk and put the ICIP protocol into practice, and that happened in so many ways throughout the whole Papunya project, not just the exhibition, starting from, in those early days when we were digitising the works, and the principles around self-determination and Indigenous-led storytelling and correct attribution, cultural restoration of cultural authority. It was all there, and everything that happened with those books was done in consultation and reference with the community members, from were they happy for them to go on Trove to getting them to look through the optical character recognition that initially happens automatically when material is digitised here at the library, but we weren't 100% sure about how it was going to render the like the diacritics and the language markings that are really critical for giving the right meaning for words. And so we had the community look over samples of those to make sure that it was okay. And in fact, every little piece of OCR was checked manually to make sure that it was correct. And, we're talking about 350 books, so it wasn't, it was quite a big piece of work. To things like, a lot of the admin work and finance and all those behind the scene things, and travel, when you're dealing with a community that's tremendously remote, like very, very remote, it's all very different, and it provides a really valuable learning opportunity for an organisation like the National Library, when we're embedding new practices, to have an opportunity to really understand how important they are and why, and how we can make make them work.
So in 2008-9, when I was working for the Northern Territory Education Department as the linguist, I went out to support the school program, which was a small language and culture program working with Karen and Roslyn. And I asked, where are the books? I knew there must be a lot of books because back in the office in Alice Springs, I'd found a handful. I knew that there'd been a history of having a literature production centre, and nobody really knew where the books were. Somebody said a previous principal had packed them away into boxes, and there was a risk. It was going on at the time that in various schools, materials were being taken to the tip and thrown away. And so people were really worried and anxious until we finally got the tip off that the books were stored in the old dark room. And there was a padlock on the door to the old dark room, and nobody was sure where the key was. It's kind of the perfect metaphor of lock them away in the dark and throw away the key. But the key was discovered. A previous groundsman had a key. We unlocked the padlock, flung the door open, found the light switch, and there was the collection, higgledy-piggledy in boxes, in some of them were like from the canteen, I guess, you know, chips and things like that, but full, when you open the box, full, spilling out with hundreds and hundreds of copies of the books. You know, the sort of stripy shopping bags with them higgledy-piggledy bent. And so that was refinding the collection, and that's when Vivian and I met. Vivian was in the community doing some other work, and she was looking to find some books for a different purpose altogether. And that kind of started our partnership. Charlotte came and surveyed this situation, and it just started a whole process of work that we came to do together over many years, which has culminated now in this exhibition. One of our really original and continuing goals for working with the collection was to make it accessible, so out of the darkroom, out of behind a padlock, accessible but also safe kept and documented so that this history could be known. And that was a set of goals that particularly with Charlotte Philippus and that Vivian and I, that we all arrived at. By planning out these exhibitions, it meant that we had to bring community members and family and kin and the original illustrators and authors together to make decisions about what books should go in, how they should be presented, to work through the protocols and the permissions. So it became, the process itself of planning an exhibition became a wonderful way to create access, to create knowledge about new knowledge and new interpretation about the history and about the collection. And having the exhibition first at Papunya with the slogan "At Papunya, by Papunya, for Papunya" was a really wonderful way for us not just to talk about having exhibitions and have people imagine what that could look like, but to really do it there, and for people to understand how this collection can look when displayed this way and the kind of story that it can tell a larger audience. So that's why exhibitions were really an important part of thinking about access and storage and bringing this collection out of the dark and into life.
Beck, you've started to hear some of that story of Out of the Dark Room, but can you tell us a little bit more about that Indigenous-led storytelling?
Yeah, so I just love that story, by the way, that moment when, you know, those doors were opened and there were all those books just waiting to be rediscovered. And I think what really struck me about listening to Samantha talk about how that came together is when she spoke about, you know, the whole community coming together to tell that story, and how it couldn't have happened any other way because it was, you know, a story that was being told by the community, for the community. And when we set about creating the exhibition here at the National Library, we wanted as much as we possibly could for that to be, you know, the basis of the way we develop this exhibition as well. Obviously, we cannot bring a whole community of people to Canberra, as much as we would have loved to have. But it was really, you know, really clear from the outset that this was not, I mean, this is not our story to tell, and it would never have worked if, for an institution to try and tell the story of a community when their community is there to tell their own story. And so we had to bring the community here. We did late last year. We had what we called a curatorium, and we brought 3 of the people that you're hearing from today came down at that point. That was Rosalind and Karen and Priscilla, and they came down and spent 2 days with us, and really it was just a lot of listening on our behalf as they told us what stories they wanted told, how they wanted it to be told, what they wanted people to know about their community and their history and where they were from, what was important to them. And that's what was important to them was what became important to us. And I think that's the only way a project like this can be successful. And I think that's why you see such an authentic and rich exhibition there today, is because it's their story in their voice.
Thanks, Beck. We'll head back into the gallery and hear from Rosalind and Samantha.
Hello, my name is Rosalind Dixon. I work at Papunya School. I started when PPN and Samantha came to Papunya about the exhibition, about the books, and we decided and to have one at Papunya. And we was looking around how we could do our exhibition back at home at Papunya. We had our exhibition at the Art Centre, Papunya Chupi Art Centre. Yeah, Alice Springs. We had another exhibition in Alice Springs. Now, last year we came to Canberra, looking around how we have to decide how to put frames, pictures. They'll see what they do, or these things they do at Papunya before. They'll come and see the pictures. Oh, this is how they was doing at Papunya. Drawings. And I also work at the school. And I did iPads with the kids in the classrooms. Kids really love the iPad, drawing on the iPad. They loved. Lucky to have them books in our school, so kids can learn both language. Yeah. Kids really love these stories. I was reading this book in the classroom with kids, and they really loved these stories. Over and over, I was reading this story. Cukur Bawarna Bicara. How they did like nice drawing pictures. That's why kids love the pictures too. About the big snake here, rainbow snakes. Thomas Stevens' story. Yeah. This is the sad story.
Yeah, he shouldn't have tried to eat that snake, should he?
This is another sad story. Kids love to see the pictures and how this picture was made. Nice pictures, drawings, campsite. And I was like telling them, this man, Kutaja man, and it's like a real, this two made a little camp, and another one came, Kutaja man. I was telling them in my language, in our language. They was relaxing, just listening to the stories.
Yeah, it's harder if it's in English, isn't it?
Yeah.
In English, they have to concentrate a lot because they're just learning English.
Learning English.
Yeah.
They gotta learn two-way language in our community, even at the school. Pilkari and Arikora. Muranga ninara paluro kolino. Palo nadano paluro anno kantina koro. Palo langoro rikora manchira anno murakoto. Ngurang pinyina katira puko joingam pungkola rikora manchini. Palo nadano rikora wingam pungkola kolini. Balro kolini rikora ngarera. Kanya kung kangalayan kola wangkango. Pala danyawa pilkadi. Palo nadano palo ngurlo jam piringo. Palo languro kung kangalayan kola wangkango. Chilpi palong pakoro. Ngali nyango pilkadi dinna. Pualaka pala da pilkadi. Kuya pacar bay. Ayuha pualaka. Yango pala ma pilkadi manchila. Uya makadi kuya. Ngayon ngurlo ringani.
Throughout the exhibition, the Pintupi-Luritja text is prominent, and that's a very clear decision. But I did wonder if you were keen to share, what was it like to hear that beautiful story for you? One word that I've learned is recorder, which is a more modern word. That's a very interesting one to play perhaps to children or to your colleagues, that moment of being able to hear a story in language and piece together yourself. So I can see there's a couple of reflections. Thank you for sharing those through. And absolutely, Olivia, the pieces that are in the exhibition are the originals, and that was really important to Colata, wasn't it? That they were the originals and they were framed beautifully as the pieces of art that they are. So if you do come on site, you can see those originals, or if you head on to Trove, the digitised copies are photographs of every page of every book. Beck, we've got some great questions here. Would you like to address Bryce's interesting question there?
Yeah, sure. So, Bryce, a really interesting question around how the readers have been used, in truth-telling and in understanding, I guess, some historical context. And I think I really appreciate that question. It's an interesting one. Obviously, it's early days yet, and we've yet to see how the digitised materials and the materials in the exhibition will be used and interpreted by different people. And of course, as we saw just now listening to Rosalind, one of the very important uses is, of course, the passing on of knowledge and culture and language to future generations of the Papunya community itself, which is what they were written for in the first place. But when you think about it, and I was just having a little walk through the exhibition earlier myself, and I always find myself spending that little bit extra time in that middle room. So if you remember Alistair saying before that middle room is the room where we've showcased, or where the community really wanted to showcase the first contact stories, the when we first met whitefella stories. And I think those are the stories that we will see as being really important. They're just incredible first-hand accounts of, a really extraordinary part of Australia's history, and one that there aren't that many first-hand accounts of. And I think that's where you can, there'll be a lot of interest in reading those stories and what they tell us about. I was reading, one of the stories earlier when they were talking about, the white people coming and they didn't know what they were seeing at first, and then they were given flour and blankets and all the things that we read about, in kind of historical context. But this is very much more immediate and, contemporary, and yet we have, the voices of the people who were there telling those stories. So I think you're quite right, Bryce. I think this is there's great potential here for, what we can learn from these books, outside of, the context of what they are for the Papunya community itself.
The next expert that we'll hear from is Vivian Johnson. So we'll head back into the gallery and hear from Vivian.
So the first iteration of this exhibition was at the end of 2024 in the cleaned out gallery of the Papunya GP Art Centre, and it was preceded the day before by this massive storm, so that the only people who got to see it was a pop-up exhibition were the people of Papunya themselves, which was a perfect outcome from my point of view, because they were the people who'd been denied access to this material for 20 years since it had been shut in that darkroom. So, and then our exhibition travelled to Darwin and Alice Springs. And in the meantime, the National Library had become interested, and Guy Hansen and Rebecca Bateman travelled to Darwin to see the show when it came on in Darwin early in 2025, and said, we want to do it, And in the Papunya show and also in the Darwin and Alice Springs shows, they weren't the original drawings, they were facsimiles, because we just stuck them to the wall of the art centre with those magnet things that people use these days, just the facsimiles, no framing, we couldn't afford it. And so the idea that we might be able to do a really proper, because the surviving artist, Kulada, Dennis Nelson, was very insistent. He said, it's okay for Papunya, but I want them framed. And so to see them here on these walls, all beautifully framed and given the respect that they're due as art, this has been the whole thing about this, what I called before, a body of literature and art that has been neglected and actually not seen, because it was dismissed as like stuff that for primary school kids, who cares, In my mind, what makes this collection of literature different to a lot of Indigenous literature is that by necessity, I understand this as a writer myself, you have to write for an audience that is sufficiently numerous, to justify the publication of your book. But these books were written for the children of Papunya. They're written, by the people of Papunya for the people of Papunya, and that makes them really special. I mean, it's not the only body of literature that was created for the bilingual program, but I, as an art historian myself, someone who's studied the Papunya art movement for decades, I tend to think that the closeness to what was happening in the school of the art centre, of the artists who were right, like 10 metres away in the old town hall creating masterpieces, does have an impact on the quality of the artwork that was done by their basically sons and daughters. And the writing, it was interestingly, it was mainly the women, young women who did the writing and young men who did the illustrating. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but that's how it panned out. But I do think that the fact that that we have here a window into a world that existed in the 80s at the time when they were produced. And that was a time when the land rights legislation wasn't so old, and people were believing that with the bilingual program, they were given a way into their children's education, and some empowerment in terms of being able to determine what their children were taught, and that they were taught in their own language, for example. So that there's a real inspiration from many sources behind these particular body of works. But these books were written by the people of Papunya for the children of Papunya, and in ways that were intended to engage them by telling them their stories, by reflecting back the community in which they lived.
So with a project such as this one and working to an ICIP protocol such as the one that the National Library has, one of the really important things is to ensure that the use of all materials is signed off by the cultural authorities and the ICIP rights holders of those materials, and in this case, of course, the Papunya community, the illustrators and the authors of the books as the, copyright and creators of the books, but also as the holders of the ICIP that is contained within those books. And so that was a really important part of this whole project. It's various stages, from starting right back at the beginning when we were digitising the books. Obviously, we needed to have permissions to do that, and most importantly for them to go online. Of course, the community were more than happy to give those permissions because it's what they wanted. They wanted to share this work far and wide. But we had to ensure that was all signed off on, and that their wishes in terms of if there was anything that shouldn't be shared, not that there was, but we needed to be clear about that, or that needed to be shared in a particular way, that those wishes were taken into account and those conversations were had before anything went live on Trove. Similar conversations occurred around the publication, the book that we've seen throughout some of the presentations, and the use of various photographs and drawings and representations of, ICIP and cultural practice and knowledges in that book. Again, all of those permissions and those sign-offs from the community, the rights holders, the cultural authorities were really, really important to get. And it really means that not only does it mean that we could digitise a book and make an exhibition, but it also means that future use is easier because we know, who to talk to, and we know how to go through that process.
Thank you. So to round out our webinar today, we will leave you with sort of a final piece from Vivian and Samantha.
Yeah, the collection significance is, of course, different for the original authors or their kin and the illustrators. But I think for a wider non-Papunya audience, the significance that I hope people can appreciate is that these books were created at the same time and by the same families as the very famous Western Desert art movement. So that was blossoming and in Papunya at the exact same time that Kulara and Thomas Stevens and Abraham were pioneering this new form of visual art, of representational imagery. So as far as the art goes, this collection is nationally significant because it's a really important part of the visual art movement. It's also part of our literary heritage. These bilingual programs gave Indigenous authors the opportunity to write and create literature in their own languages for their own communities as the audience. So as a part of the publishing history of Australia, that's really significant. This is Indigenous owned and led publishing, not for a non-Indigenous audience, but for a local audience. So for people to be able to tell their own stories in their own languages for their children and for that to contribute and be a key part of their education, that's really important as well. So these collections as part of the Northern Territory Bilingual Education program is part of a really innovative education movement that took part in Australia. So on many counts, this collection and the other collections created at bilingual schools, of which there are around 14 that had literature production centres, they contribute to our national history in many ways, and for that reason they're really significant.
This is just a taster. It's just a tiny, tiny fraction of what they actually produced, like 250 books over a decade. And it's an extraordinary rich output. The idea that, and people, given the opportunity, will have an application to what it is they're doing that is quite outstanding. And I hope that people will be encouraged to look further and to search on Papunya Readers in the library's catalogue and to discover that there is so much more and there is so much richness here. Spend your time here first, but because this is a wonderful window into that collection, but there's more.